Hello, everybody. So we're halfway through with the class. We're now at weeks 3 and 4. Weeks 3 and 4 for the way things are laid out on FSO. Let's talk about that real quick, or just combined in one big module. We have this first assignment, NPCs and a manager, which we'll be talking about today. Then you have your big project, the sneaky project. So that is worth 25% of your grade for the class overall. And we'll be talking a lot more about that one on Wednesday, as well as next Monday. We'll cover some topics for it also. You have another discussion coming up, which isn't due till next week for week 4 stuff, which is another type of feature analysis where you're breaking things down into states and explaining their different transitions. But rather than working from different games for this one, it'll be focused on a little blurb that's described in here, basically an elevator pitch for a game. And we'll wrap up the class with this going further with Unreal AI. It's basically directs you towards some other resources to go further with Unreal specific AI type stuff, as well as going to Epic's website and showing you guys a course for that you have to get through like 50% of it to get credit for this assignment. All right, but today, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about NPCs and a manager. So the assignment on FSO links to the Google Doc here, NPC and a manager. And basically, this is going to be working with another state machine that you've been provided. However, the developers decided to release an update to some of the functions and some of the way the state machine's working to try and make it a little bit clearer about how that state machine's working. It's a very common thing for you guys to work on games and stuff, and somebody else makes changes to a system and you have to adapt to those changes. So this one will have a new asset pack for you to start with. We'll go ahead and just download that. Click the download button. And we'll be exploring that and some of the changes. We'll talk about those today for lecture. The assignment, before we get into the actual work and stuff, is basically going to have you set up a way to select the different agents. The last one had included something to issue a command to one of the agents that was already selected and stuff. We're going to see how we can choose that selection and change it based on pressing like a right arrow or a left arrow, and a way to actually track which one is currently selected and stuff. So we'll be adding visual element to see that in game about which one you have currently selected, so that be the one that you're giving commands to. So I won't be just walking through this assignment entirely. I will show another alternative way we could set up a manager and do it a little bit differently than this assignment walkthrough does, just so it's not a copy and paste for this assignment or anything like that. So we've got our new package downloaded, and put this in another folder outside of downloads. Got classes here, 2105. We'll go ahead and drop this in and unzip it. And in here, we'll open this up. Let Unreal load. All right. So just checking out what this project comes with. Don't need a second browser open for that. Oh, don't open up Epic Games. Close that stuff. All right. So checking out what the project comes with, if we do play and we press space, we see that they do have pause implemented in here. We can unpause, but right now that command is going to all the agents. So before we dig into being able to select one at a time and stuff like that, let's check out the new state machine. So state machine has the individual states as components, also a state machine class. We'll notice if we're hovering over this, it will actually have comments about what that state is doing, how it's working. On enter, it changes to gray and stops the movement. All right, state machine allows one state to be active at a time, includes error checking to point out incorrect use. So let's start off with just checking out the base state. And base state just has some functions and stuff in it. The event graph itself is completely empty. There's now a few more things. There's the enter state. It's renamed with state after it. Tick state rather than just saying main behavior or whatever it was called last time. Exit state. So we have three main things the state will run: when it first enters, when it exits, or while it's in the state. Then there's also a begin overlap. So while it's in a specific state, we can have specific things happen if it overlaps an actor and things like that, or ends overlapping with something. Those will come in handy for additional state functionality. So that's how our base state is. Let's check out idle. Idle shouldn't have changed much. It's just got the enter tick state, telling it to stop the movement, change the color, initialize that time, the timer, and does that after the timer's up, still switches back to patrol. Cool. So let's see our patrol state. Our patrol state does have some changes. The state now, when it enters, it's just changing the color, getting it to move to the current nav point. And it also is now saying, while it's in this state, if we detect an overlap with that, then we'll change to our next nav point. So this has now kind of changed. This used to be directly on the agent itself, but when you think about it, it shouldn't care about overlaps at all with nav points unless it's in this state. So we're moving that code over on the state itself. Another thing that's changed is the location of these nav points. These nav points used to be on the nav agent itself, but really patrol state is the only one that should care about those nav points at all. So it's moved into the state itself, more encapsulated to help focus on just this state having the info rather than the agent itself having all the variables and things. So looking at our agent now, seeing how that's moved, if we wanted to like change one of these, the patrol route, let's say I wanted it to go between this one and this one for this guy. If we just have that agent selected and look in our details, we won't see our nav point list or nav point array. Reason for that, we have to select the actual state for patrol to get access to it now. And let's change it up. As I mentioned, let's have them just go to that one and then this one and back and forth. So this guy's doing something different. Let's just clear out the array. First one will be that one. Second one will be this one. And so now it's just going between those two. And so on and so on. So that is on the specific component. If we just have that agent itself selected, we won't see those nav points. Keep that in mind. You will need to show that for the screenshot. So got to make sure you select the actual state that those variables are held in. All right. So that's one major change. Let's check out the nav agent itself. Nav agent now has some comments around everything. So beginning play, it sets the the agent to start patrolling. We do have an exit condition set up for pause. Anytime we call toggle pause, it'll check if it is in pause. If it is in pause, then it restores previous state. Now, the last assignment had you set up this pause functionality. This one comes with it included. I think this function would basically be just the backstate function from the last assignment. So one of the big changes is just the names of functions to be a little bit more specific and a little bit more intuitive with how things are named. If it wasn't in pause, it does change it to pause. All right. So straightforward there. This event is actually an interface function on the agent itself, so that the states, when they're actually telling it to change, like our patrol doesn't change states. Idle does. Idle, as it's going through, we're just getting owner and using that interface message here. So we don't have a direct reference to the nav agent itself, since that'd be circular. So our states just can communicate to our nav agent through the interface it has. Same thing for like the setting of the body color, avoiding that direct reference to the state machine, which holds all the states, or the agent itself, helps prevent a circular include. So agent now has this interface, and if we needed to add additional functionality on our agent, we could add that through the interface as well. So we have the helper for the body color down here as the last thing. So any questions about those changes so far? One last class we haven't checked out was the state machine itself. So the state machine now has some more comments in here, along with a simplified graph a little bit. When it begins play, it binds collision events and adds the states. So add states was already done before. This is something new. This is a collapsed graph, so it shows up as a subgraph under our event graph. We can just double click it to open that up. In here, this is going to use event dispatchers saying, hey, anytime our owner begins overlapping with something, we're going to call this function, and this one will actually forward it over to the state function. So it's no longer needing to put the code directly on the agent itself. Each state can have their own overlap situations. And this is begin overlapping. We do the same thing for end overlapping. If we wanted to add other types of things, like if it was hit or took damage, we could totally throw that, or follow the same kind of functionality where we're binding to an event rather than just doing it all on the agent itself. So back over to our event graph. So that's what it does on begin play. The set initial state still does the same thing, just immediately enters that state. One big change that has happened is our tick. Rather than having a bool to track when we need to enter a state, or when we need to exit a state or anything like that, we're just checking to see every frame if next state has been set. If we've told it to change a state, that's how we can check without having to have a extra bool to track and reset and all that stuff. So if we do have a next state, exit the current one, update the variables for what our current state is, what our next state is, and actually enter the new state after we've exited the previous one. Then down here, rather than doing a bind for the tick or anything for that run main behavior. What we're doing is just calling the tick state function on the current state. So it's a little bit cleaner there. Our states no longer have to bind themselves for when they want to run that main behavior. It's just tick state. And there is additional print strings and things like that, just to remind you if you forget to do something while you're using this. All right. So any questions so far from the changes to the state machine? Don't think so. All right. Not yet, at least. Sounds good. We'll continue on and get into the actual content of setting it up so we can issue a command to individual agents. So we're going to need some sort of tracker for this. Now the assignment will have you set it up under the level blueprint. If we go to the blueprints and open the level blueprint, we see there is a space bar set up to just get all the nav agents and call toggle pause on all of them. So we're going to be replacing this with individual selection. What I'm going to do is break the link there so that code's no longer running. We'll test it out in game as well. So clicked in game, pressing spacebar. It does something, it just moves my camera up because we have a default camera view. But we're no longer pausing those agents. So we're going to set up a manager, and I'm going to do this differently rather than doing it just in the level blueprint. I'm probably going to want to, if we have multiple levels, I'd want something that I can just place into each level rather than having to copy all the code we put here into each level blueprint respectively. So I'm going to set this up a bit differently, and we're just going to create an actor that we can throw into the level and act as manager. So blueprint class, we'll be doing an actor. Got to give the actor a name. And let's go BP agent manager. All right. So this will need to know about all the agents and have some sort of index tracking which one is currently selected. So I'm going to need a couple of variables and stuff for it. So we'll add a new variable for our agents. And a bool wouldn't be very useful for us. We're going to change that to actually an array of our agent type. BP nav agent. And this will be a reference directly to all the objects. File save. One thing I could do, I believe it shows you how to assign it in the level editor, but if we wanted to assign this in the editor and we have this here, we could make this public. So that way in the level, once we drop our agent manager in, and I'm going to just throw it in the center so I have a nice easy way to select it. We can add those since I made it public by clicking on the eye. We can add our two agents we have. Agent 2 and Agent 4. Just so it is populated. Save that. Back into our agent manager. We're going to need a variable to track which one of these agents is selected. So we'll add another variable, and we'll use an integer to track our cur selected index. That will not be an array, it will just be a single integer. So just change that to a normal single variable and integer type. I'm going to compile it, and I'm going to say when we start the game, we have none selected. So 0 would be the very first agent in that array. I'm going to say this is -1 when we first start the game. So we're setting it to an invalid index, so it knows we don't have any selected when we start. Over in the event graph, if we wanted to do input on our actor or an actor that's just kind of placed in the level, if we try and just look for that keyboard right, we can add that input key here. If we try and print string from this, just print out hello when we press the right arrow. If we try and play, I have an agent manager in the level. Our game's now getting input. If I press right arrow, we see that is not printing that hello. Reason for that, there are only certain blueprints that automatically get input sent to them. The level blueprint is one, as well as the actual characters that you're controlling. So any of the pawns that we put in here would have that functionality. If we want another blueprint to start having input events, such as like another actor that we've placed in the level or something, we do have to go to begin play and say, I want to start getting input. So there's a function called enable input. The target is what blueprint you want to actually process input events. Well, ourself, we want this agent manager to have it. And we need to tell it which player controller it's going to take input from. So we'll just ask get player controller from our game. And index 0 would be the first player or the first keyboard or controller plugged in. So now it should be processing input and we should see that hello. So we click in the game, press right, we're getting that print. All right, baby steps. Next up, I want it to change what thing it has selected when we press right. Hello can go away. And when we press right, we're going to be changing our current index. We'll just be doing a simple increment to start. So we'll say plus plus, change which one we have selected. And then after that, we'll go ahead and print that selection out. And for that, we'll just plug in the, actually have it change the string it's printing to the actual index that it has. Another thing I want to do is add in that space bar again. I want to actually call toggle pause for the one we have selected when we press spacebar. So for keyboard, spacebar. And basically I want to get our current agent from our array. So we'll be getting our agents array, getting one of them from the array, needs an index. Well, we have an index being tracked for which one's selected. And from that, we can call the toggle pause function. All right. So we compile and save. If we play, right now, I shouldn't have any selected. If I press space, boom, we're actually getting an error. You see over here, attempted to access -1 index from the agents array. Well, -1's an invalid index. So just like when we're setting up our nav points, we're going to want to add some index protection and things like that. Let's try and play again. I haven't changed any code yet. if I press right once, it did actually print out. Let me pause this so it doesn't continue. Our agent managers now told us we have index 0 selected. So if we zoom and press space, we see it does change that index or change that character. I'm issuing commands to one at a time now. Let's select the other one. I just pressed right. We now have the other one selected. All good there. We change once more and try and pause again. Index 2, but it only has length of 2. So the indexes would be 0 to 1. So there's a couple of array protection or index protections that we'll need. First one, I tried issuing a command when we didn't have a valid index here. So it tried doing pause on -1. What we'll do is just do a quick check asking if our current selected is a valid index from our array. Is valid. And we're going to need to use this a couple of times. We'll need it down here for a branch. We'll need it up there for a branch. So we will be branching. And rather than just always having it go through, whoops, press goes to the branch now. When it is false and we don't have one selected, we'll do another print string, just telling our player or telling the dev who's testing it, must have a selected agent before issuing a command. Just so we have a nice little readout letting us know what to do. As I mentioned, we'll be using this a few different times, and I don't necessarily need to have all these nodes copied and pasted everywhere. I just want to check, well, is it a valid thing? Well, we'll go ahead and collapse this into, stupid toolbars getting in the way. Collapse this into a macro. Reason I'm not going to use a function is because we need two outputs, one of them being true, one of them being false, and macros support multiple execs out. So we'll collapse that to a macro, give the a name to the macro. We'll call this as valid selection or something like that. And let's also rename this output would be valid for the top one, not valid for the bottom one. All right. So we'll also do that up here when we are changing the selection. We'll do it as a quick way to make sure that it has a valid selection after we've modified that. If that is good, we'll go there. But if it's not good, we'll do pretty much the same thing and make a circular array so that it works like if we get to the end and go past it, we'll have it loop back up to that 0. So we'll take that cur selected and be setting it to 0 when it's not valid. And add a reroute node so it's not overlapping. All right. So we should be able to change and cycle through and only issue the command when it is valid now. So it shouldn't get any more errors. So just trying to press space when we are first playing, don't have one selected, tells us we got to make a selection, press right, still issues that command, right again, You have that one, top left one selected, are able to command that, right again, cycles back to the first of the array. Okay, but let's say I pressed right arrow a whole bunch of times. Can you guys tell me which one I have selected right now? Nope, I couldn't either unless I was I was paying super close attention to the debug readout. Let's add some in-game info. So yes, you can tell if you're watching super closely on the output log, but from a gameplay perspective, not so great. And the end user wouldn't have any output logs or anything like that to tell what's going on. So for this part, let's add some in-game feedback. So we'll have our agents have some sort of a visual element to them. We'll hop over to the viewport to set up something so we can see which one's selected. Quick note about that. This one does just guide you through to make like a disk beneath them and shows it that way. For the actual visual element, you can use whatever visual element you'd like. I recommend staying away from lights, as fun as they are to change colors and stuff on. It'll screw up the agent's body color if you have like a red light and it's supposed to be in a white state or something. It'll look red and be hard to tell what state it's in. So for this, we'll add another component, just another visual component. There's sphere, plane, cube, cone. Let's do like kind of a cursor over their head. Let's do a cone. And we'll rename it to selection indicator. And put that over their head. Rotate that around. One thing we haven't really talked about is like, if I wanted this to actually be attached to the character's head, let's do that because that's kind of fun. So our mesh has animations and a bunch of sockets and things for each different bone that's animated with it. If we attach an object to the mesh itself, we can then utilize the socket system and say, don't just attach to anything. Let's attach to the actual head so that it animates along with that. We'll attach it to the head and we'll zero out all the rotations. Rotate it how we want in a moment. Let's see, rotate that around, move it up so it's a little bit more dynamic and actually animating with the head. I don't necessarily want it that huge either. Drop the scale down on it a little bit. All right. Okay, we have a selection indicator. There's a few different things we could do to change how this looks in game. Right now, all of our characters will have that and be animating with that and stuff. We could change the color, or we could change something else where either it's just not showing up when they're not selected and showing up when they are selected. The document will guide you through the changing of colors. Works very similarly to our body color change, just a different parameter. But we also could say, for this, we'll have it start as hidden in game. All right. One other thing while I'm here, we just added a basic cone, which by default has a bunch of collision. I just want this to work as a visual element. So we will be changing this to no collision. Don't generate overlap events. And there's a question here. It would just be toggling the visibility, right? Yep. So there's a few different ways we could do it. Turn it toggle visibility or toggle hidden in game will change how it shows up in game or not. So we'll set that up for today's lecture using, let's just do the visibility thing. So visibility, turn that off. Now that we have it all set up and stuff. And in game, we'll leave it off until we do have one selected. So we'll need a way to turn that on. We'll add a function here that our manager can call and turn its visibility on or off, or toggle it rather. So we'll be taking our selection indicator and we'll call toggle visibility. Now we need a way for us to call this, so let's add a just custom event similar to how our toggle pause was set up. It's just a custom event we added on here for things to call. Custom event. We'll name this toggle highlight. Plug that in. Pretty straightforward since toggle visibility already exists on scene components. And then back in our agent manager, when we do change selection and we do have a valid selection, we'll want to make sure that it does toggle that selection. So we'll get our current selected agent, asking our agents array for reference to it. Get that currently selected one. And just cleaning that up a little bit so it can go straight through once we have our new selection made. So after we've modified it, either with plus plus or after this, we'll continue on this merge branch here. Tell our newly selected agent to toggle its highlight. All right. Plug that in just before we do the print string for the index that we have. Compile, save, and let's test this out. You press play, don't have any selected, that makes sense. We press right, we now have an arrow over that guy's head. Press pause, you can very clearly see which one we're affecting. Press right again, now we have another problem. So when I pressed it, at first it was fine, but as we're cycling through, one thing we're not doing is turning off the one that we already have selected. So our agent manager, when it goes to change selection, before it just goes and selects a new one and turns that highlight on, we'd want to check if we already have one selected. So if we have one selected, well, we have a nice little macro here for that. If we do have one selected, we'll basically be toggling that character's highlight. Copy that, bring that over here. And then changing the selection. If we don't have one, we'll just go straight over to change the selection. Just gonna clear out some of the unused stuff, give myself a little more space. All right. So it should turn off the one we currently have selected. If we do have one, change it, and then turn on the new one. Back over to our game. Press right once, we're interacting with that one. Press right again, and we now have that one selected. All right. And right will always only have one selected. Let's see what happens if we added another agent in here. I'm going to just clone this guy or duplicate, holding Alt, just move this guy over here. So we now have 3 agents in our level. So we have 3 agents. If I press right, we see it's just cycling through those 2 that it started with. Anytime we add a new agent, we have to remember to tell our manager it's got that array of how many agents it has. We'll need to add it in here as well. So we'll add that last one in there, and we should be able to cycle through all 3. Cycle, pause, cycle, pause, cycle, pause. All of them are paused. And those 2 are probably stuck on each other. Oh, they're pushing around slowly. One thing we could actually, that actually brings up a good point. One thing our agents are not doing right now is really avoiding other objects that might get in their way. For that property, just as kind of like a side note, under our character movement, there is something built in for the characters navigating around called RVO avoidance. Don't actually know what RVO stands for. I just know that it's like relative velocity of other objects to avoid each other. I can't remember the specifics about what that stands for, but we can turn that on. And now they'll actually try and walk around each other rather than walking directly into each other, stuff like that. So they'll be trying to avoid walking directly into other objects. All right. So we've got selection all working. Let's say we wanted to do a left arrow also. So we have our right arrow totally working. We'll do our left arrow kind of like right next to that. So just give myself some more space down here. And let's add in left arrow as well. So we're going to iterate backwards through the array. Keyboard left. And I'm going to actually copy this entire thing since this is how we're changing our agents or the selection for our agents. We'll be reusing most of that. When we press left, it would still want to check if we had one selected, turn that one off, same code there. The way we're changing our index would need to change though. Rather than doing a plus plus, we'll be doing a minus minus or decrement. And we'll move these over into this new one. Get rid of the plus plus. Plug that in as our what we'll be printing. And now also, if we do a minus minus and it's not valid, we're going backwards through the array. So if we're going up here, we hit -1. We wouldn't want to just set it to 0. That's not too helpful. We'll probably want to set it to something else. And Gene, you're saying for the toggle highlight, you thought you needed to make a flip-flop when the event is called. No, since toggle visibility is already set up, our toggle highlight is just calling toggle visibility. It's already set up to toggle. So if it is on, it'll turn it off. If it's off, it'll turn it on. So it's got that the flip-flop already happening for us. So yeah, toggle visibility comes from scene components. You can call it on any scene component like this mesh toggle visibility. There are a few different visibility options, so you might be more familiar with the set visibility option where you have to pass it what bool, whether you want it true or not. But toggle visibility is already built into, well, toggle it. And since we're just changing the visibility on or off, we don't need to use a flip-flop or anything like that for this. If we were maybe changing to a different color, we'd have to have some sort of tracking of what current state it's in order for it to flip or flop to the other side. But thanks for bringing that up, since I know you guys probably have seen flip-flop in the past and might have used that as well. But that's basically just setting up a toggle, which is already built in. All right, so left arrow back here where I was continuing on for the not valid, and we've just decremented. Rather than setting it to 0, let's set it to the last index. So we'll ask our agent array for the last index, not least index, last index. So it gets set to the other end of the array. All right. So forward was already working, and we just changed where we were modifying the index here for how that's choosing what is the next index. We'll go ahead and play and press right, right, right. We'll go left now, left, 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 right, 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 left, left, left. And so we have the ability to swap between all of them, pause which ones we want, unpause them, and issue them individual commands at a time. So, any questions about anything we went over today? I guess one thing we could go into is rather than changing the visibility, let's take an alternate look at that real quick. So rather than our selection indicator being hidden the entire time when it's not active, we will keep it always visible. And let's just change the color. So in here, we have the ability to toggle the highlight. We'll be reusing that event, but instead of changing the visibility, let's go ahead and set a vector parameter value on materials. We'll be changing its color. Parameter will be color. That's by default something on all the base shapes. For on color or whatever you want to call it, let's pull back here, linear color. And let's say when it is selected, it shows up as magenta. When it's not selected, we'll need to be doing the same thing, just a different color. So copy those nodes, change it to, let's just go full white, mostly white. And then here's where that flip-flop would need to be. We could even use a flip-flop node. We'll do flip-flop. All right. So the first time it's called, it will change it to this. Second time it comes in here, being told to toggle again, we'll run through this bottom. All right. Let's test this out. In game, they all have their indicators showing, but we press right. And we now have one selected, moves on to the next selection, and we have that functionality of being able to cycle either way. Only thing we really changed was what visual it's actually using. All right. Yep. And there's a few ways you can design the flip-flop. Flip-flop can be dangerous if you use it too much, but it is a pretty nice, easy to use node. Other than I would recommend not just relying on it. Ideally, we'd have some sort of variable that we're tracking whether it's been selected or not, our own, and setting up our own logic rather than just relying that toggle highlight is only ever called when it's not selected at first or is selected after, things like that. We could even go a little bit more fine detail, and rather than flip-flopping, we'll say toggle highlight could take in an actual bool about whether it should be turning on versus off. Should turn on, and branching based on that. And that gives us a little bit more precise control rather than just toggle. So that when we're in the agent manager, we can say specifically send it a false value when it's on this one, but when after it's made its new selection, make sure to turn that one on. Same goes for our other arrow up here. And that gives us the same functionality, but a little bit more specific in code about what those nodes are doing. All right. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for the agent manager here. One thing we'll leave off with is before next class or next lecture, I would like you guys to, well, finish the assignment here and then also take a peek at the project Sneaky Sneaky and start checking out some of the documents and things like that for this assignment. So you have an idea about what we'll be getting into a little bit more. If you do have any questions, you can bring them up during the next lecture and stuff, so we can make sure that you have a clear idea about what's needed for it. Sound good, everyone? Alrighty, well, I'll go ahead and stop the recording here then, and I will see you again on Wednesday.